Look at this one, Julian. Thinks she's an intellectual. Beatrice Croft's voice, sharp and brittle as shattered glass, sliced through the polite murmur of the penthouse gala. Every head, adorned with jewels and sculpted hair, turned. Julian Vance, billionaire CEO of Vance Industries, followed her contemptuous gaze. He saw a young woman in the stark black and white of a maid's uniform, sitting on a small stool in a shadowed alcove, a worn paperback held delicately in her hands. She had been invisible a moment ago, a ghost, meant to serve and disappear. Now, she was the unwilling centerpiece of a cruel spectacle. Honestly, Beatrice continued, her laugh a tinny, unpleasant sound, you'd think we paid her to read. What could someone like her possibly get out of a book? Julian felt a familiar wave of exhaustion. These parties, this world Beatrice reveled in, felt like a cage of gilded emptiness. He was a ghost here, too, haunting the life he'd built before grief had hollowed him out. "Let it go, Beatrice," he murmured, his voice low and devoid of energy. He didn't care about the maid. He didn't care about the book. He only cared about the silence that would follow, the blessed moment when he could retreat back into the fortress of his own mind. The maid, Alara Sanchez, didn't flinch. She slowly closed the book, marking her page with a slender finger. She rose with a quiet dignity that was, in itself, a rebuke. Her eyes, deep and brown, met Beatrice's for a fraction of a second, holding no anger, only a profound and weary sorrow. Then she turned and walked away, her posture erect, her presence more powerful in her silent departure than Beatrice's was in her shrill pronouncement. In that moment, Beatrice had not merely insulted an employee. She had lit a fuse that would incinerate her entire, meticulously crafted world. Julian, though he did not yet know it, had just witnessed the first tremor of the earthquake that would shatter his own. What happened next would force him to choose between the cold, sterile fortune he possessed and the priceless humanity he had long forgotten. The next afternoon, as Julian walked past the library of his sprawling penthouse, a room his late wife, Clara, had curated with loving care, but which he now used only more than cruel. It was a desecration of the principles Clara had lived by, in the very home they had shared. He could have confronted Beatrice. He could have called security. He could have fired the maid himself to spare her the humiliation. But a different idea, strange and compelling, took root in his mind. He wanted to see this Alara Sanchez for himself, not as her employer, but as an equal. He wanted to understand the quiet strength she had displayed in the face of Beatrice's mockery. He felt a sudden, desperate need to see if a person of true integrity could still exist in his world. That evening, he made a call to the head of human resources. He explained that a special consultant, John Anderson, would be joining the building's maintenance and service staff for a few weeks to conduct an efficiency audit. He described himself, a man in simple clothes, with glasses and a baseball cap to obscure his infamous features. It was a mad, impulsive plan, born from a grief-stricken apathy that was slowly, terrifyingly, beginning to curdle into something else. The next Monday, Julian Vance, a man whose net worth rivaled that of a small nation, clocked in on the service level of his own skyscraper, wearing a janitor's gray uniform and a name tag that read, John. His world of boardroom battles and stock market gambles had collided with a world of mops, buckets, and the quiet, invisible labor that kept his empire gleaming. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit break room of the sub-basement, John Anderson was just another face. He observed Alara from a distance at first. He saw how she shared her meager lunch with an elderly janitor whose hands trembled too much to open his own container. He saw how she meticulously cleaned, not just meeting the requirements of her job, but exceeding them, taking a quiet pride in her work. He saw her find a lost wallet, thick with cash, and turn it in immediately without a moment's hesitation. Each act was a small testament to a character that seemed forged from steel and grace. Beatrice, meanwhile, escalated her silent war. She would accidentally spill a glass of red wine on a white rug just after Alara had cleaned it. She would leave passive-aggressive notes for the supervisors, complaining of dust on surfaces that gleamed under Julian's inspection. Through it all, Ilara remained poised. She simply cleaned. Wasn't just a book. It was a lifeline. He discreetly put the photo back and made another call, this time to his private investigator. He gave him a name, Miguel Sanchez. The information came back within hours, and it hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. Ilara wasn't just a maid reading for pleasure. She was working 2 full-time jobs, sending every spare dollar to a specialized care facility for her younger brother Miguel, who had a rare neurological condition that had rendered him nonverbal. The books were for him. She read them aloud to him over the phone each night, believing that the stories, the rhythm of the words, could somehow reach him in his silent world. The cruelty of Beatrice's mockery, her casual dismissal of Ilara's reading, now seemed monstrous. This was no longer a simple case of workplace bullying. It was an attack on a sister's desperate, beautiful love for her brother. Julian's detached observation was over. Now, it was personal. He began to orchestrate small conversations with her, as John. He'd offer to help her with a heavy trash bin or share a cup of coffee in the break room. He spoke of his own life in vague terms, crafting a narrative of a man who had lost his small business, a shadow of the truth of losing his wife and, with her, his purpose. He wanted her to see him not as a figure of authority, but as a fellow traveler in the world of quiet struggles. Ilara was reserved at first, polite but guarded. She had learned that vulnerability was a luxury she could not afford. But Julian was patient. He listened more than he spoke, asking about the books she read, about the characters she loved. He saw her face light up when she spoke of literature, a brief, brilliant glimpse of the woman behind the weary exterior. The dam finally broke one rain-lashed Tuesday evening. Beatrice had staged her most vicious attack yet, accusing Ilara of scratching a priceless antique table. Though the head of housekeeping knew it was a lie, the scratch had been there for months. Beatrice had made such a scene that Ilara was issued a formal written warning, a black mark on her perfect record. Julian found her in the deserted stairwell, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The uniform, her shield of professionalism, seemed to swallow her small frame. Hope that cost more than she could ever make. She spoke of her parents, lost in a car accident years ago, leaving her as Miguel's sole guardian. She confessed that reading to him was the only thing that made her feel like she was still connecting with the brilliant, funny little boy trapped inside a silent body. "That book," she said, her voice trembling, "the one she made fun of. It was my father's favorite. He was a journalist. He taught me that words have power, that they can fight injustice. Right now, they're all I have." Julian's heart, a thing he had thought long dead and buried, ached with a pain that was sharp and new. This wasn't pity. It was a profound, soul-shaking respect. He saw in her the same fire, the same unwavering moral compass that he had loved in Clara. In that cold, concrete stairwell, 2 lonely souls, separated by a chasm of wealth and circumstance, built a fragile bridge of shared humanity. He wanted to tell her everything, to sweep in and solve all her problems with a single phone call. But he knew, instinctively, that to do so would be to rob her of her agency, to turn her into another charity case. No, the solution had to be as profound as the injustice she faced. He had to uncover the root of Beatrice's poison, not just for Ilara, but for himself. Driven by a new, focused rage, Julian unleashed the full power of his resources. He had his investigators dig into every aspect of Beatrice Croft's life, starting with the Vance Foundation, the charitable organization Clara had founded to support underprivileged children's education and health. Beatrice had taken over as chairwoman after Clara's death, a move Julian had allowed in his fog of grief. He had assumed she was merely a socialite playing philanthropist. The truth was infinitely darker. The initial reports were staggering. Beatrice was a parasite. She had been systematically embezzling funds for years, funneling money through a series of shell corporations to fund her lavish lifestyle. Luxury vacations, designer clothes, even the down payment on her family's new yacht, all paid for with money stolen from sick and needy children. The cruelty was breathtaking, but it was a deeper dive that uncovered the true, rotten core of her malice. The investigators looked into her family. Cruelty wasn't random. It was a vicious, generational vendetta. She wasn't just punishing a maid. She was trying to extinguish the last ember of the Sanchez legacy. The revelation hit Julian like a physical shock. The injustice wasn't just personal. It was systemic. A story of the powerful crushing the powerless, repeated across generations. And the ultimate irony was the most sickening of all. The Vance Foundation, the legacy of his moral, compassionate wife, had a discretionary fund for rare pediatric neurological conditions. The very money Beatrice was stealing could have been the money to cure Miguel. The fight was no longer just for Alara. It was for Clara. It was for Marcus Sanchez. It was for every person who had ever been silenced or erased by the casual cruelty of the powerful. The choice crystallized in Julian's mind, clear and hard as a diamond. This could not be handled quietly. A private dismissal, a broken engagement, that would be a victory for Beatrice, allowing her to slink away into the shadows with her reputation bruised but intact. The poison had to be drawn out into the light. The wound had to be cauterized publicly. The annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala was in 2 weeks. It was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, an event where the wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity. It would be Beatrice's stage, her moment of triumph as she announced another year of record-breaking donations. It would, Julian decided with icy resolve, be the site of her execution. He stopped being John Anderson. He returned to being Julian Vance, but a different man now inhabited the expensive suits. The apathy was gone, replaced by a cold, relentless purpose. He spent every waking hour with his legal and security teams, gathering irrefutable, ironclad evidence. Bank records, wire transfers, sworn affidavits from former Croft employees, digital reconstructions of Marcus Sanchez's lost files. He was building a cage of facts from which there would be no escape. He saw Alara only from a distance, the ache of their shared confidence in the stairwell a constant, motivating presence in his heart. He knew he had to maintain his distance to protect her, to ensure the final act would be a complete surprise. Clara's most cherished pieces of jewelry. Among them was a simple sapphire pendant, his first gift to her. It was priceless to him, a fact Beatrice knew well. On the Thursday before the gala, while Julian was in a marathon meeting with his lawyers, Beatrice executed her plan. Using a key she had duplicated months ago, she took the sapphire pendant from the safe. She waited until the service staff shift change, a time of mild chaos. With practiced ease, she slipped into the deserted locker room and planted the necklace deep inside Alara's worn handbag. Then, she walked calmly to the building's head of security, her face a mask of distress, and reported the theft of a precious family heirloom. The accusation, coming from the CEO's fiancée, was acted upon immediately and without question. 2 uniformed police officers, accompanied by a grim-faced security chief, entered the staff break room. They called Alara's name. In front of all her colleagues, they demanded to search her belongings. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave of shame that washed over Alara as they emptied her bag onto the table. And there, nestled amongst her wallet, her keys, and her worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, lay the brilliant, accusing blue of the sapphire pendant. Alara's protests of innocence were lost in the collective gasp of the room. She was handcuffed and led away, her face pale with shock and disbelief. The quiet dignity she had fought so hard to maintain finally shattered. By the time Julian emerged from his meeting, it was too late. Alara was already at a downtown precinct, being processed. The news hit him with a fury so intense it left him breathless. This was his fault. His secrecy, his elaborate plan, had left her exposed and vulnerable. For a terrifying moment, it felt as if all was lost. that Beatrice, with her simple, brutal evil, had outmaneuvered him and would win after all. The night of the Vance Foundation Gala arrived, cloaking the city in a veneer of glittering elegance. The grand ballroom of the Vance Tower was a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. Beatrice Croft stood at the center of it all, radiant in a diamond necklace, accepting compliments for her tireless charity work. She was the queen of her world, triumphant and untouchable. She believed Alara Sanchez was a forgotten fool. The standard self-congratulatory speech they were expecting. Julian's eyes bored into Beatrice's. For the past year, this foundation has been led by a woman you all know. A woman who speaks eloquently about compassion. He paused. A woman who, behind the scenes, has been using this foundation, my late wife's legacy, as her personal piggy bank. Gasps erupted. Beatrice's face went white. On the two enormous screens flanking the stage, bank statements appeared. A complex web of shell corporations, offshore accounts and wire transfers, all leading directly to Beatrice Croft. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. But this is not simply a story of greed, Julian continued, his voice dropping, taking on a tone of cold fury. It is a story of a deep and bitter injustice. An old newspaper headline flashed onto the screen. Reporter investigating real estate fraud dies in suspicious accident. Beside it, a picture of a smiling, handsome man, Marcus Sanchez. This man was Alara Sanchez's father, Julian announced. He was on the verge of exposing the corrupt foundation of the Croft family fortune when he was silenced. His daughter, a woman of impeccable character, came to work in my home, and Beatrice Croft, harboring a decades-old grudge, decided to destroy her. Beatrice shot to her feet, her voice a shrill shriek. Lies! These are all lies! That girl is a common thief. A thief? Julian's voice was dangerously soft. Let's talk about thieves. The image on the screen changed again. It was high-definition security footage, time-stamped from 2 days prior. It showed the private locker room. It showed Beatrice, her face a mask of smug certainty, looking over her shoulder before slipping the sapphire pendant into Alara's handbag. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The visual proof was undeniable, a public unveiling of pure, premeditated evil. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened, and Alara Sanchez walked in. She was not in a uniform. She wore a simple, elegant dark blue dress that Julian had arranged for. She walked with her head held high, her quiet dignity restored. The cruel, he declared, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Effective immediately, the foundation's entire board is dissolved. It will be rebuilt from the ground up, with a new mission: to seek out and rectify injustices like the one you have all witnessed tonight. He then turned and gestured to Alara, who had reached the foot of the stage. I would like to introduce you to the woman who, through her quiet integrity and unbreakable spirit, reminded me what this foundation, and what my life, is supposed to be about. This is Alara Sanchez. He walked down the steps and took her hand, his touch both a support and an apology. He faced the audience again, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. I have lived my life in a gilded cage, blind to the struggles of people like Alara. I saw a uniform, not a person. I saw a servant, not a hero. For that blindness, I am profoundly sorry. He looked directly at Alara, his gaze holding hers. The Vance Foundation's first act under its new charter will be to fully fund the research and clinical trials for Miguel Sanchez's condition. Not just for him, but for every child who suffers in silence. A wave of applause, hesitant at first, then thunderous, swept through the room. It was a sound of catharsis, of a moral order being violently righted before their very eyes. But Julian wasn't finished. In a voice meant only for her, but which the microphone still caught, he said, Alara, I'm sorry. For everything. You showed me what it means to be strong, what it means to have character. You saved me from myself." Tears streamed down Alara's face, but they were tears of relief, of vindication. She squeezed his hand, a silent acceptance that spoke volumes. In the ashes of Beatrice's social ruin, a new and powerful alliance, forged in trust and mutual respect, had been solidified. 1 year later, the world was a different place. Beatrice Croft was serving a lengthy prison sentence for embezzlement and perjury. Her family, disgraced and bankrupted by the ensuing lawsuits, had faded into obscurity. The Vance Foundation, rebranded as the Vance Sanchez Foundation, was now a national model for ethical charity, co-chaired by Julian and Alara. Its primary initiative, the Miguel Sanchez sun-drenched courtyard of the new downtown public library, a project she had championed and he had funded. Beside them, a young boy with bright, curious eyes looked up from a picture book. "Look," Miguel said, his voice clear and steady as he pointed to a drawing of a bird. "A mockingbird." Ilara's eyes filled with happy tears as she hugged her brother tightly. She looked at Julian over Miguel's shoulder, her expression filled with a love and gratitude that was more precious to him than all his billions. He had offered her his wealth, but she had given him back his soul. They sat together, two people from different worlds who had found their common ground in the pages of a book, in the defense of a simple truth, that character is the only currency that truly matters. The world may try to judge you by the uniform you wear or the station you are born into, but true worth is written in the heart, a story that can never be erased. What, after all, is the measure of a person if not their capacity for empathy in a world that so often rewards cruelty?